own your shit, right? Whatever that may be. My journey, I went for years just pushing all that stuff down until it became too much. When I physically externalized all those thoughts I was having, things started getting better for me. Whatever you're going through trouble, I want you to just sit back and ask yourself why. Why yourself to death? As a spy, your most important interrogative that you have to ask questions to your asset is why.
Yeah, that's the real challenge is guys like us who are capable and can figure things out. The trick is not always having to do it ourselves because we're capable of doing it ourselves. But I think a lot of times we short ourselves when there's other professionals out there who could do it a whole lot better than we can.
Absolutely. I mean, it's men supporting men. When you think about it, it's the hardest thing that we have is asking for help. You know, that's something that we have to learn and do often. I think past couple episodes, this is something that you articulate is that we all try to pull each other up. You know, even in the smallest ways. You know, and just admitting to yourself. A lot of what I talk about in my book is like finally owning all those internal conversations. As I like to say, owning your shit, right? And so it's like admitting that, you know what, I don't know anything about this. Maybe I should. You know, seek out somebody that knows what they're doing. You know, ask them about it because it's all about growth.
It's weird to me that we don't do it. I mean, we posture. I do it too. I'm not saying everybody else. I'm saying like I do it too. But we posture and we pretend that we're better than we really are. I understand why we do it, but it's dumb. I mean, there's no other way to say it. It is truly dumb, especially probably in your line of work where. You know, the consequences, for example, of me deceiving myself are probably not that great in the grand scheme of things. The consequences of you not doing these things literally spells life and death.
Well, I would slightly disagree with that.
Okay.
In that I think it's important that when you deceive yourself, you're not being true to who you are. And it's just as dangerous as it was, you know, for me as a Green Beret turned spy, right? Working in this world that deception is the number one, you know, one of our key things that keeps us safe. But when looking at us as the individual, as the man, when in what I talk about in my book is what you're seeing is a guy who is believing the deception of everything around him, right? And that I let it take hold in me. I became someone else. And I didn't stay true to the values of who I am.
Well, I actually really want to break that down. I spent some time thinking about what we wanted to talk about today and researching what you've been up to. You said, and I quote, deception is what keeps you safe, right? But I imagine it's very difficult when you live a life of deception, and that's what you were doing as a professional, whether it's as a Green Beret or working for any of the 3-letter agencies that the U.S. has, or something completely different, even being an actor. I wonder how often men like you and actors on a different scale, how often they buy into their own bullshit, with all due respect.
Yeah. Totally. No, totally. And it really, I think in order to get at these apexes at the U.S. government, whether you go Joint Special Operations Command, working at a 3-letter agency, Special Forces, Navy SEAL, or go Ranger Regiment, any of those, as I like to say, the Adventure Plus package options of life, you're going to get to a certain point where, you know, your experiences, they're going to tell you, I'm a very competent person. And you have to be very, very careful. I mean, you see arrogance in some of these circles, and you just, you know, in order to really grow, you have to be really mindful of yourself. And it's more of it's self-awareness is probably one of the most powerful things that you can develop over and just in having like that growth mindset and being able to go out there and try new things. And I mean, when I went from a Green Beret to become a spy, I was just like, all right, I'm going to just, I think this stuff is cool, dude. I'm just going to jump in with 2 feet and figure it out. And I got a good big old slice of humble pie, you know, because I'm entering into a whole community where they're all tired of the James Bond movies of SF guys and Navy SEALs coming in and be like, you know, kicking in doors and the bravado and everything. And to kind of come full circle, what we were talking about at the beginning here is that I had to become someone else. I totally had to become someone else. I couldn't be the guy who was in the Operational Detachment Alpha. That's a Special Forces ODA in that we say a team room, which is like a locker room. And you got a bunch of hardened type A personalities who, you know, signed up to go kill, capture enemy. And, you know, does that have a place in the intelligence community? It does, but I had to dial a lot of that back. And so I think when we are not true to ourselves, when we're not true to our nature, that it's something called, I like to say, it's emotional dissonance. And it takes, right? It takes a lot of calories. And I started looking at myself as that. I realized that I can't be the barrel-chested freedom fighter that I wanted to set up for, or that I signed up for in this particular setting. So it's when you're looking inside these organizations and, you know, wanting to do the job, I wanted to do the job at the expense of being true to myself.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I'm taking so many notes. You probably see me punching away at my keyboard here because I'm taking a bunch of notes. You talked about arrogance hurting you, but also from where I sit, there's got to be some level. I don't know if I want to call it arrogance or ego or just a healthy sense of confidence, but there's got to be some level, especially in your line of work. And we're going to get into that in a minute because I think we jumped the gun a little bit. I did anyways, because I was excited about this conversation. There has to be some level of, I'll say for the sake of argument, belief in yourself. And I think that's a spectrum. We have humility, or I would say self-deprecation on one side of the equation, and then on the other side we have extreme arrogance. And there has to be a level of humility, but there also has to be some confidence, because you can't step into the environments and the worlds you're operating in while you're feeling crappy about yourself or self-deprecation or some of that humor. Like, you actually have to have some belief in yourself, I imagine.
That is, 100%. And the proof is in the pudding. You know, I look back to just my journey as a man, right? I started off in Boy Scouts, or playing ice hockey, Boy Scouts, doing hard things at a very young age. I go up to the White Mountains and, you know, get a brush with death. And at like 12, 13, 14. And it was funny because a lot of the hardest things that I have done and have endured in my military career, I always looked back at these elements when I thought I wasn't going to make it as a 12, 13, 14-year-old boy messing around in the White Mountains in New Hampshire. And so it's experience builds up confidence, but you have to have the self-awareness about yourself that when you're stepping into something new, that you may not be, the expert yet. And so it's really having to take a step back and let other people lead, or admit to follow other people, or seek out coaches. I think probably I'll say this is that in my deployment to Iraq, during that time frame, the guy I replaced, good dude, lot of experience, but wasn't that forward leaning or that confident. So when you're around a bunch of other special forces types, hardened dudes, all with multiple combat deployments, we value that assertiveness, you know, because we sense that assertiveness. Because if you're not going to be that way, you're going to come off as weak. And we're not in these communities is, when you're doing stuff that the president deems, some of the stuff I worked on, there was an article General McKenzie just came out with in the Atlantic last week talking about how he sanctioned the strike on Qasem Soleimani. And for those Order of Man listeners out there, I am one of the dudes that helped make that strike happen. And when you're doing stuff at that level where the president of the United States has visibility on it and everyone in that food chain, there isn't time for feelings or emotions. And we just have to put it together, set all that aside and make mission.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Soleimani. We're also going to talk about al-Baghdadi. Like, we're going to talk about some of these things. And I've got about, 27 different questions I've typed up as you've been talking right here. So I do want to back up, though. I want to hit pause on the conversation we're having right now. What is a spy? All right, because like most of us, we see James Bond and we see these types of things and we think, oh, there's a spy. Nathan Hale, I think, is regarded as the America's first spy, I would say, based on what I've read about early, American history. But what actually is a spy? Is there a definition for it?
Well, really, I'd say probably the common understanding that we have, we look at Hollywood and everything else. There's a lot of different intelligence disciplines within the intelligence community. You have the National Security Agency, which specializes in signals intelligence. And that's an entire agency of spies that specialize in technical data, et cetera. And then you have CIA, which is more of the common, what we imagine what spies are, and that is human intelligence. And human intelligence is going out and recruiting assets.
This is being out in the field, I imagine.
Yes.
Got
yes.
it.
So my technical title is I was a field case officer. A case officer is someone that spots, assess, and recruits clandestine agents for the good of America.
You're being
spies come in
a
different
little
forms.
bit, and I understand. So what you're telling me, if you can answer this, is that you were a field case officer with the CIA. That's what I'm hearing you say.
No, I can't give you any affiliation that I was with an agency, but yeah, I was a field case officer.
Got it. Fair enough. And I can respect and appreciate that. I think, some of the concerns that some of us have is not concerns necessarily, but there is this layer of secrecy and protectiveness around it. And I understand the sensitive nature of the information that we're dealing in, but it makes, I think, a lot of people wonder, is this in our benefit? And I think it is, but also to our detriment. And where's the line? You know what I mean?
Absolutely. So I love this conversation because I have a feeling of where it's going to go because I have some pretty strong opinions, and I think ultimately is that with all the secrecy around it, it's needed. It's not like anyone's just going out there and doing this job, Ryan, I think about how much, I don't even know what the vetting process was for even me when I got recruited and crossed over from, took off my Green Beret and became a spy in 2018. And, I was officially out of the government and military as of last year. But you have people that are out there far in front of the tip of the spear trying to collect information to give us an edge, to give decision makers an edge. And what we have, and having ran in certain circles in the intelligence community, is what the number one problem that we're facing as a nation right now is disinformation. And we're trying to cast stones. This disinformation is trying to cast stones at our intelligence agencies, assuming that we're doing all sorts of nefarious stuff and not really advancing our national interests. And that couldn't be any more farther from the truth. We're constantly out there trying to get an edge anywhere we can on our adversaries. It's just, I think after years of fighting counterterrorism and doing counterterrorism intelligence operations, which for those that are listening who are not familiar with that, in the world of counterterrorism, you have to move fast. You got to move fast. These guys, these terrorists, they're not going to be in one place for very long. And so when you have a bed down location on a dude who's pretty bad, like, so what we call, that's called getting a fix, then we have to finish him, with the opportunity we have. And that brings up another topic is just even in that, it's not that simple. There's a lot of very strict legal review of everything that happens and everything that we do. So there is a lot of bureaucracy with it, but with Executive Order 12333, and there's all these legal reviews that happen over clandestine operations to ensure that we're staying within our legal left and right limits. And personally, I joke in the book, in the acknowledgments of the book, this is just kind of an inside joke to some of my friends that are still in the community, is that I would joke about, someday I'm going to be director of national intelligence, right? And moreover on that is I view that if anything that we have now is we have so many roadblocks in place that it makes it difficult for the intelligence operative to really push ahead. And I think that we're due for another Patriot Act. Honestly,
It's funny that you talk, because I wrote that down about 10 seconds ago, Patriot Act. And if you ask the common American citizen like myself, I try to be rational. I try to be level-headed. I try to see as much of the equation as I possibly can. I don't have all the facts and data in front of me, so I make my decisions based on what's in front of me. And I think there's a lot of reasons why something like the Patriot Act makes sense. And I also deeply question and am concerned about the ramifications of something like the Patriot Act when it comes to my own personal interactions, my own business. Early in 2020, I was approached by the FBI. And they came to my house. They left a card in the door. I was out of town. My then wife saw it. She was concerned, as I was. I responded back. It was a gross overreach, and I don't have to get into all the details right now. But it was a complete overreach of my personal privacy, and those agents knew information about me that is not publicly and readily available. And they were questioning my organization. And I get fucking furious when situations like that happen, when I know there's real evil in the world taking place, and you're questioning me about teaching men how to live more righteously, how to serve our families, how to lead in your communities, how to coach your son's T-ball team, and you're coming after me and scaring my wife and my kids. I got a problem with that, man. And I know I'm getting fired up. It's not directed at you at all, but I think this is probably pretty indicative of the average American citizen.
I think so. I think you were probably wrapped up in probably the same thing. There was a SF guy, Mike. He runs a survival podcast. Teaches survival instincts and stuff like that, and
Fieldcraft survival.
Fieldcraft survival, yeah. So I think that the homegrown violent extremism branch of it's kind of stretching it. I kind of understand. It's two sides of the coin, right? Is FBI basically the way the FBI works is that you have an analyst, right? And if they have a hunch on something, or a special agent has a hunch on something, they write a requirement for it. And then they go out there and they investigate against that requirement.
Fair enough.
And that they have the legal authority to do that.
And they should.
Absolutely. And honestly, like I've worked a lot of FBI special agents, and they do some really, really good work, especially going after child trafficking, child pornography, violent crime. Some of the stuff that these agencies see in violent crime is horrendous. And then the sheer amount of data that the Joint Terrorism Task Forces within the FBI, which is like a clearinghouse for threats against national interests, threats against homeland security, our homeland, it's a big enterprise that needs to function. So I'm careful to say that there's obviously going to be some SAs out there that it's their job to sniff around in these things. I can't apologize on behalf of the IC.
No, it's not on you at all, for sure,
because it's not on me.
Right.
But it is alarming to me, though. It really is alarming to me. Is that you are right? It's like, at what point are we spending our resources in a correct manner, or coming after you, coming after Mike, right? And sniff around. Are these people breaking the laws? And it's, what's the hunch that led there is the fact that you're trying to empower men, because that doesn't look like to me like a guerrilla force or homegrown violent extremists, or
I wouldn't think, but who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, and so I think it's what is, you just got to keep your nose clean, man. And I know it's like, well, why should I have to worry about someone looking over my back? And this is kind of comes full circle, is we need to have a lot more focus on, the threats to society, as the things that are going on in this country. We got open borders. Who knows where our enemies are doing? Being able to operate within the contiguous United States. So there's a lot of things that keep me up at night, especially with the burgeoning tech industry, with the advent of artificial intelligence, which is great. I use AI. I use it every day. But, China's weaponizing that stuff as we speak, so they can oppress their citizens more, right? And I almost guarantee it. I mean, they're doing it as a survival mechanism, right? And so how do we prevent those controls from ending up here in the United States? And that's why we have to vote people in that would prevent that, and empower our law enforcement community, our special agents, to have impactful cases without trampling all over our constitutional rights.
I think the question as a concerned citizen is, how do we know? You take the Democratic side of the aisle, you take the Republican side of the aisle. Many people, and I would largely agree, this is two sides of the same coin. I have a whole lot of distrust for politicians in general, elected officials, and it's hard for us to know, to determine, to decipher. And also, I think one of the concerns is that there's very little accountability from our perspective. When we talk about these agencies, we talk about the DOJ, we talk about government, we talk about even the military, there's very little accountability to the American citizen who these agencies and people are supposed to be serving. And I would love to have some faith and trust in the, and I do. Of course, I do. I love law enforcement. I was in the military myself. I respect the work that you do, because I think you're a good person and you're trying to do right. But there is a lack of accountability from our perspective. What do you have to say about the accountability that's built into it?
I feel like as a society, we have just kind of let go of standing up and taking accountability at all, right? We're just constantly ducking it. I'll give you an example, right? This recently, I know you guys like to bring up headlines, and I don't know if you already mentioned this or not, but this is something me and my Green Beret friends talk about. And the Gaza aid strip that they built. The right? The multi-million-dollar. Are you talking about the yes,
the port or whatever, the dock or whatever it was that floated out to sea?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Okay.
And so there's two sides of that coin, right? And this is they missed the administration missed a really great opportunity here. Firstly, it's, hey, we're new at this. Talking about in the beginning of this conversation, learning, reaching out, figuring stuff out, growing. How I would have encapsulated that is I would have said, all right, yeah, we spent like I think it was like $30 million.
Yeah,
but guess
32
what?
million, I think.
But guess what, China? We just got even better at this. And I don't see you out there doing it, but we'll be ready. We'll be ready to employ this in Paycom in some way in the near future. So they missed kind of like a good opportunity to kind of spin it that way. But at the same time, it's like, well, this was a failure. So, who's standing up and who's owning this, right? And just in these small examples, I would say probably, I look at my book, right? For example, there was an individual, his name in the book is Jake, and he died by suicide around early June 2019. This individual died by suicide, and it rocked the whole unit. And and granted, like, we have a habit of, like, when someone dies by suicide that, it was their decision. But no one wants to look at the underlying factors of what was going on in that individual's life, right? And there was some certain factors that pressures put on him, I think, unnecessarily by the chain of command. And I am not putting the onus on them or anything like that, but these are things that we don't take into consideration when we're making decisions for people. And I think in terms of like having accountability, a good dude died on your watch. What were the decisions that you made to best take care of that individual? And was it really in this calculus, in this abacus that you're looking at, did you really do everything that was necessary? And, for a lot of us that we go our whole lives, like me, I always wanted to be a spy when I was younger. I grew, you watch the James Bond movies. I read a ton of Le Carre. Well, not so much I always wanted to be a spy, but it just kind of like evolved into that. And I look at him, or, I look at that. It's like this dude was having a mental health problem, and they took the one last thing away from him, and that was his mission. And they took it away from him, and they benched him. And so that, like, the second, third order effects of that, if anyone else struggling with mental health, who are like, no. But come back full circle is like, where was the accountability of that? It's an easy scapegoat to say that, oh, well, he had a lot of TBIs. And I was like, in my personal opinion, is that I think there was a lot more going on with him that we're not readily able to admit.
Okay, so yes, I can see that. But also, again, it's hard for us to know. Like, when we see situations like this, there's just such a level of distrust. And I'm wondering how we bridge the gap between our agencies and our citizens. And I think a lot of this is being misused. I think there's, a term that I've heard recently is lawfare. Especially as we're recording this, Trump was just charged with 32 or 34 felony counts of campaign violations and things like this, campaign financing violations. I think there's just a whole lot of mistrust. And I'm wondering how we bridge the gap between our three-letter agencies, our law enforcement officials, and the common man.
It's a very tough and delicate dance, Ryan, because you have so many things that are compartmentalized, and they're compartmentalized for a reason, to protect the means and methods of how the information is collected and how it is disseminated. So I obviously, when you're doing covert and clandestine operations, you can't celebrate your wins, publicly. That wouldn't be too smart, right?
Right.
Unless it's like a kinetic strike, something like Soleimani or Baghdadi, that is a big statement pieces. But in what we like to call the great power competition, with China and Russia, right? And the wins to be able to demonstrate and to say that, all right, well, FBI as an organization stopped X amount of terrorists crossing the border, or have rolled up. I think it was like last month they like 40 something of people on their watch list. I mean, fact check me, but like that they've identified that have entered the US. So it's scary to think about, but to me, the underlying factor is to show how mean our intelligence machine is that, well, hey, we know where they are. We know they're crossing the border, probably a good indication of, we might know where they're at. But, to your point, it's like, how do we build trust? How do we build trust in these institutions? When we see in the open news, like you said, is lawfare is going on, to my knowledge, like, I don't know yet, I don't know how we do that, because it's, to build trust, we got to show wins. How do we show wins, right? If I was the FBI, for instance, and you have bad guys in our border, let's roll them up, roll them up. And I don't know if, they're probably got eyes on a lot of these guys. I know that the JTTF does an amazing job. A lot of the, there's stuff going on overseas that we're getting information on here in the United States. And that's one big thing the FBI does is they even make stuff happen overseas. So, but those wins never make it into the New York Times. So right. It's very difficult that a lot of the stuff that does happen, a lot of the big wins that does occur, happens below such a threshold because, bad news sells. Bad news sells, and holding people accountable, to their actions and holding, this is all we're seeing now, and for the sake of clicks, there's always a hook, with everything that's going on in the media and in the news, and personally, I think that a lot of what we're seeing and what we're reading in the mainstream media is being conflagrated by our enemies. Through bot farms and soon to be AI, and who knows what the future holds for that. It's a very tricky thing. Because here I am, Ryan. I'm saying you could trust us, right? And you can. Guys like me. I mean, I signed up for the right reasons. I would die 10 times over for this country, no doubt, right? And we're always going to try to do the right thing. But we're competing with an enemy who doesn't play by any rules. And that's kind of bring back to, sort of a second Patriot Act is, well, how do we shut this down? And I know that big tech like Meta and Instagram, for instance, they do a really good job of trying to shut a lot of that stuff down that is trying to shut down the misinformation. But then it's like the flip side is like, well, it's freedom of speech. You had other people believing in it. And I would probably say that we just need a better educated populace. And, those, I don't have my phone in front of me, but these little machines, they're dangerous and you can't believe everything you see. Oh,
of course. Yeah, I think it's important to be vigilant about that sort of thing. I do want to go into what you had talked about with al-Baghdadi, leader of ISIS. Obviously, Trump was very vocal when he was, I was going to say killed, but if I remember correctly, he killed himself. I think he blew himself up. And the line is, he died either. What did he say? He either died like a dog or the dogs were chasing him down when he died. It was a very hilarious.
He died like a dog.
Yeah, very hilarious in true Trump fashion. And I think there's a lot of power in that too. And then Soleimani, I believe, was a drone strike, if I remember correctly, maybe in 2020. What was your level of involvement with each of? Would you call them? Soleimani, I think, is largely classified as an assassination. Would you call it that, or would you call it something else? And then, what was your level of involvement in these two more high profile cases?
Absolutely, love to articulate. Obviously, I'm going to stick to what's in the book, so I'm very limited in terms of what I can say about those things. It's probably
been reviewed by the DOJ, and redactions have taken place, and there's all sorts of iterations with your book, I imagine. Is that accurate?
Mm-hmm. My book went through government pre-publication.
Right.
So I'll stick to the script. You know what I'm saying? So,
Fair enough.
But I would say I had a very small role in Baghdadi, very small role. All the credit goes to the guys that did the raid and the people that found him. And those like, especially the people that found him, I think that is worthy of book of in itself. And obviously I can't talk about that. But yeah, he did go down. He did clack off suicide vests in a tunnel. And the dog that was chasing him down was injured. It was a beautifully executed raid by some very, very hardened professionals.
No doubt.
In the middle of the night. And a lot of that kind of happened. It was a very crazy time because we pulled out of Syria and then Turkey invaded northern Syria. So it was a very complicated time frame, in that you have for maneuvers and fire and everything else. I can imagine that the Joint Chiefs and SecDef and the CENTCOM commander at the time, Mackenzie, were pretty nervous of how it went down, but it was beautifully executed. So he died in a compound in Idlib in Syria, and that's kind of how it went. And for that, it probably set ISIS back. I was there I basically showed up, did a tiny bit of work on it, and then we were trying to get the number 2 guy while I was there too, in some clever ways. And then they ended up bagging the number 2 guy, I want to say in 21, I think, or maybe early 22. But guy had to go. ISIS is and this is regardless of what side of the aisle you're on politically, these guys are terrorists.
Of course.
They're thugs with guns.
It's the same thing with Hamas. You can do the Free Palestine and the Israeli stuff. Like we know Hamas is they're terrorists. We know that clearly, obviously. So we can have other conversations, but let's call a spade a spade.
Yep. And these guys, they have to go. We can't let them fester. The longer you let them fester, the more their movement grows. If we didn't move in and do what we did in 2014 to address that issue, who knows how big the caliphate would have became. And on top of that, they're facilitating terror networks everywhere else in the world. Majority of my career, well, not a majority, but when I was a Green Beret in Southeast Asia, I spent a lot of time in the Philippines, and that the facilitation of money, guns, men, right? There was a point in the war during Operation Inherent Resolve where ISIS was telling people to go to the Philippines because we were kicking the crap out of them. And I was over there in Southeast Asia at that time, and we were seeing an influx of foreign fighters to various countries there. And that's very dangerous. And they're going to destabilize the security and economy of the countries that they go to. Based on, what it is you talk about what order of man stands for. These guys didn't grow up with men around them. They really didn't. If you think about it, they're just like any gang member in the street right now. That's kind of how I look at it. And the one thing that they saw, the strong thing that they saw in their neighborhoods growing up was a tough guy with an AK-47, And but the dangerous thing is that they legitimize it with their religion. And this is an extreme version of Islam. It's not for our brothers, follow Allah, right? Sunni or Shia in a respectful manner that allows other people to, also practice their religions too. But in these extreme cases, that's how they weaponize it. So to Hamas is, when I saw that happen to Israel, I knew the first thing I said, the people, other than the people that have lost their lives and the horrible things that have happened, that I knew that the average Palestinian was going to stand to lose the most, because they can't fight. It's the same situation. Hamas are thugs with guns. And could have Israel handled this a lot better? Absolutely. They totally could have handled it a lot better.
In what way would you say? I have my own thoughts on that, but I'm not as well versed as you. But in what way could have Israel handled that better? Or currently? They're still handling it. So they're
still handling it. Obviously, it's Hamas has got to go. Hamas, they're operating, and I'm under the assumption that they are being helped out by Hezbollah and Iran, and so when I saw that all happen, I just pointed to the map and looked at Tehran and said, "Really, guys, really?" And but so here's the thing: is that what do the Palestinians want? And in the spy game, and I'll teach everybody on this podcast something that we say, and if you're a businessman, you probably understand this concept very well. Is what is the PT buff, right? So put the benefit up front. PT buff methodology. So what could have Israel PT buffed the average Palestinian with, right? And here's the thing: is that from the Israeli standpoint, is they could have set up refugee camps. They could have set up something, so when they did invade, that they would have better conditions that they had. But then the flip side is that would have been the media, not saying our media or anything else, but it would have been flipped around like they were in, the Palestinians are in concentration camps, et cetera. Right. And so honestly, it's the real thing is like, all right, well, hey gang, let's move to a 2-state solution. Let us take out Hamas and we'll come to a bargaining table. We'll come to an arrangement. And I think that would have been it, or very limited surgical strikes on Hamas targets, which the Israelis are very much capable of.
I mean, from where I sit, and I'm not an expert, and I'm not in the arena that you are, so you just tell me if I'm full of crap or not. But I think Israel should have just ran in there with guns ablazing and taken care of this problem in 2 months. I think the fact that they're trying to extend this out and do the whole PR circuit about what this looks like is actually creating more harm than good. Like, just go in there and finish it quickly, effectively, fast. There is going to be collateral damage. Of course, that's war. It's painful. But the longer this gets dragged on, the less likely it is that Israel is going to be able to do what they need to do to defend themselves and their way of life, because they're losing the PR battle.
Absolutely. And we live in a time of information warfare, information operations. And every decision, every move that you make is under a microscope, or how, you have to look at it as playing, we like to joke and say 4D chess, right? You're playing 4D chess, and every move you're making is going to be picked apart. Mm-hmm. And so if I try to put myself in the shoes of Bibi Netanyahu, right? And he's probably looking at it, this is a lose-lose situation for me.
Of course.
Right? And so it's, why not take the hardliner path, and deal with it once and for all? And so but then at the same stake, it's really awful and utterly horrifying what's happened to the average Palestinian over there. We got dead children. We have, but every strike that they do, in having done counterterrorism for a while, is that the one thing that we can walk away from the global war on terror and Operation Inherent Resolve, all these learned lessons over fighting for 2 decades, is that when you kill a civilian, you have civcas, as we say, civilian casualties, you're going to lose the population. And in special forces, you look at what is the center of gravity, right? You do center of gravity analysis. So the center of gravity is the population, right? Is a big center of gravity in how they, what motivates them, what's their need. So every time you kill a civilian, you're losing your own legitimacy for the fight, and you're losing the support of the population. So if I was the Israeli government, I would want the Palestinians to reject Hamas. Now, I'm obviously not that well versed in this stuff, I'm just kind of like a casual observer, of a lot of these things. I'm more of going after the IRGC and DPRK and PLA and stuff, and obviously ISIS. But so I am speaking a little bit outside my the court, and when we're talking about Hamas and the Palestinians and the Israelis. So it's extremely complicated. It's a very complicated thing. And I think a more limited version of what we were seeing would have probably produced more effects. And it comes down to the trust thing. But then again, it's when they raided that hospital, Hamas was using the entire basement as an operations center.
Exactly. At some point, the Palestinian people are going to have to reject it. Like there's no other path. You've got traitors in your midst, you've got terrorists in your midst, and you're upset that the terrorists in your midst have infiltrated or attacked a neighboring country, a sovereign country, and that sovereign country is working to defend itself. What do you think is going to happen? Of course that's going to happen. Of course.
It brings me back to, initially what I said is that the average Palestinian loses the most because they have nowhere to go. They can't trust their leaders that took charge of them, and they can't trust the Israelis because of all the demonstrated attacks against their own people and their friends that die. So it's almost it's a very complicated problem, but it's a self-licking ice cream cone where you're going to have the next generation of Hamas fighters are learning to hate Israel right now and will vow vengeance. And you have people in there, and that's how extremism begets extremism. And as much as I'd love everyone to come together and, heal, but these people have things that they want and they've wanted for years. And just like the Israelis, they have things that they have wanted for years. A two-state solution seems to be the only way they were going to get any sort of lasting peace, I think, in the area. And I know probably a lot of Israelis would disagree with that. And you have tons of concerns on each side. But let's be honest here. We're fighting over sand, fighting over imaginary lines that we built in the sand here.
I mean, we say that, I think that's easy for us to say. And I think that's the arrogance of Westerners. And I'm not putting this on you exclusively. We do it too. I was in Iraq in 2005, 2006. It's easy for us to say, we'll just install democracy. Those people don't value the same things we do. They're not right or wrong. It's just a different value system. So when we go in there and say things like, well, just democracy, or they're fighting over sand, that's easy for us to say. But the reality is they see it in this is holy land, literally divine. And so I think it's easy for us to say that, but the way they see it is completely different.
Oh, totally. I mean, they see it's a birthright. It's a birthright that goes back millennia. And so that's why it's not just such an easy solution
I know.
To it. And each side views each other as the aggressor, and it's just complicated because, what ultimately, what do we want, right? We want prosperity, economic prosperity, and security. How do we do that? Well, why don't we focus on the people that are the most threat to that, the ones that are disturbing the peace, which in this case is Hamas.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's like we're not going to come up with the answer on an hour-long podcast. This is a battle that has been waging for literally thousands of years. So for us to say, we got the answer. Here it is. ABC is arrogant to say the least.
Yeah. Yeah, and be completely clear and honest, with you and your audience is that I'm not the most educated guy. I'm just a dude that's been in the system for a while, and I pay attention to these things. So take my opinion with a grain of salt.
I think we should. I think that's the value of discussion like this. Is I don't have to, even though you're coming on this podcast and I value what you have to share. I don't have to take it as gospel. Like, I want to hear what you have to say. I might agree with it. I might not agree with some of it, but isn't that the point of dialogue, to actually have discourse and to be able to decipher and discern and navigate these complex issues? This is the value of what we're doing here.
Absolutely. And that's the beauty of freedom of speech, man. And having the country that we have and fought for and built and the things that we developed. This is what it's all about. That's why I fight. That's why you fought. Or I fought too. I'm not fighting anymore.
You're done. You're retired.
Out.
Are you completely done with the military and with any government type agencies that you've worked with in the past? Is that a chapter that's been closed now?
Yeah, that chapter's been closed for quite some time. Coming up on a year pretty soon. I got out. I published a book, and the whole. What I see now, for me is we're dealing with veteran suicide, alarming rates. We're anywhere from 20 to 22 a day. And it's utterly astounding. And in my career, we've gotten so good at fighting war. You were in Iraq in 05, 06, right?
Correct.
That's what you said, right? Yeah. So, back then, we were losing more dudes to combat than we are to suicide.
Yeah.
Now intense. We're losing. Where were you? Were you in Ramadi?
Ramadi.
Okay. Yeah, I have some friends that experience, and Ramadi is some nasty fighting back then. So mad respect to you, Ryan. Mad respect
not to me. I don't want to take any credit. Not to me. I saw people, men and women, do significantly more challenging, more demanding things than I ever did. I never even want to pretend like I'm in the same realm as what some of these soldiers and Marines and warriors in general did for us. I will never take credit the way those guys deserve it.
But I appreciate that, and it's when you're working together as a team, it's everybody shares a burden, I just look at, everything I've done, even Soleimani. It was, you had some of the most highly trained special forces guys the military's ever produced come together to, make that happen. And that's really what it's all about. Sharing the burden.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
The weight of this nation's defense, it will crush you,
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Well, so my question is, two things. Where do you go from here, knowing all that you know and having this history and this incredible experience as a Green Beret, as an American spy? Where do you take it from here? And then what does the man who's listening do with this information? And how does not only he live his life, but how does he ensure that, we're continuing this way of life for our posterity, our children, our grandchildren, et cetera, et cetera?
Absolutely. And so I think probably the most important thing that when you read the book, you sit down and you read Into the Darkness, A Journey of Love, War, and Emotional Freedom, book I wrote. I want you and everyone on this podcast that's listening to this is to own your shit. Own your shit, right? Whatever that may be. My journey, I went for years just pushing all that stuff down until it became too much. And when I actually physically externalized all those thoughts I was having, things started getting better for me. And whatever you're going through trouble, I want you to just sit back and ask yourself why. Why yourself to death? As a spy, your most important interrogative that you have to ask questions to your asset is why. And I sat there, and after I got back from Iraq, and I sat in that cold English basement apartment by myself during the early days of COVID, like everybody else was. And I said, you know what? Now it's time to really unpack our shit, Dave. And I sat there and I why'd myself to death. Why did I feel this way? Why did I allow other people to treat me that way? Early on in the conversation, we talked about emotional dissonance, right? How did I go from an Eagle Scout, a Norwich grad, so Norwich University is a military college in Vermont that prides itself on its attrition, not so much as its acceptance rate. and so to a Green Beret to a spy, right? How did I go from doing all these successful things in my life to being this broken individual who hated himself. You know, the ugly internal dialogue, Ryan, that was going on inside me. I hated myself. How did I allow other people to treat me that way? And there's no aha moment, gents, there's no aha moment when you're trying to better yourself and be a better man. On my healing journey, and healing never ends. You got to if you're a growth mindset person, you have to put in the work. You got to put in the work, and you got to put in the work every day. But what you can do to develop the self-awareness that I have is you ask yourself why. You ask yourself why am I angry today? You know, what is it about? Instead of just going about and letting your emotions run unchecked and influence your decision making, let's bring it back. You know, let's look internally into asking these questions. And the thing that, you know, what got me out of the dark. So once you get out of the darkness, you never go back, right? You never go back. That battle with suicide that I struggle with every day and fought every day. I sat there in my apartment and I just whyed myself to death. And I realized that I tied my self-worth to what other people thought of me. Mm. And it's like, how did I get there? And then I said, why did I get here? You know, why or how did I get here? So, and unpacking that. And, you know, at the time I didn't really, and it's like, well, Dave, why didn't you go to mental health? Why didn't you go to mental health? Why didn't you seek professional help? Because the only thing I had left, Ryan, was my mission as a spy. And I didn't want them to take that away from me. I saw what happened to Jake. I saw Jake, he got benched for, you know, taking a knee for mental health. And, you know, that was the last thing I wanted to happen to me. So I said, no way. I'm not definitely gonna, you know, I'm not gonna let them take the last thing, you know, the last thing that I have. And so I sat there, I worked through all my shit, all those ugly conversations, you know, looking back at moments in my life where I wish I was more assertive, or I wish I said this, and looking and just realizing it. And I had a calendar that during that time frame that I literally would do a mental after action review every day. So after action review in the military, Marine Corps, I think, calls it the same thing, right? So after you do an operation, you come back and you say, all right, hey, these are the sustains. This is what we can improve on. So every day I look at my calendar and I say, did I feel like taking my life today? Right? And for a while, there was a lot of red X's in that calendar. And, you know, that fueled my defiance. And, you know, I'd like you to write down a thing about therapy that I learned recently that I'd like to share with your audience too. But that fueled my defiance. So I woke up the next day and I was like, all right, what are we doing today so we don't feel that way? And eventually I got to a point where I had no days marked. You know, I get like 2 days a week where I didn't feel that way. Then it'd be 3, then it'd be 4. And I'm journaling my progression out of it. And then eventually I forgot to even mark the calendar anymore. And that was like kind of a very powerful step for me. But I kept, you know, during this time frame of my struggle, I'd say my discipline saved me too, because I love going to the gym. I do a lot of CrossFit. I'm an avid CrossFit athlete. I made the quarterfinals this year. First time I made quarterfinals.
Yeah, well done.
Thanks. I was 90. I was in the 91st percentile for my age group, and I was like, sweet.
We'll take it. We'll take whatever. Hey, you got in there, man. Take whatever you can get.
Yeah, exactly. I'll take it. And then, you know, I get up and I go to, you know, I do at that time in COVID, I was doing a lot of kettlebell work, but it was about a 6-mile round trip from my apartment to Lincoln Memorial. And I'd go run to Lincoln Memorial every day. I used to run ultras a few years ago. So I still had my, you know, ultra legs, as I like to say. And, you know, I'd sit there on the steps of Lincoln and I would say, dude, where did it all go wrong, man? Right? I'm like, yo, Honest Abe, help me out, brother. Right? And I'm sitting there and there's no one on the mall. It's just me because everything's locked down for COVID. And it was a lot of time to think about myself, but I was getting those little hits of dopamine, you know? So those little hits of dopamine to kind of keep me sane and keep me within the lines and, to fight every day.
It's awesome, man. Well, I know we didn't get a lot into the book and some of the mental struggle and victory, but I would highly encourage anybody to pick up a copy of the book Into the Darkness, because I think more than what we went into today, there's a lot of information about redemption and improvement and getting hold of your life. They tell the guys where to connect with you, where to pick up a copy of the book, and where to learn more about what you're up to.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ryan. You can pick up a copy of Into the Darkness on Amazon. Go ahead, search Into the Darkness by Dave Fielding. It'll pop right up. And then if you want to connect with me on Instagram, davefielding.dol. DOL stands for Depresso Liber, the Special Forces motto. So that's davefielding.dol. And then Dave Fielding DOL on X as well. Hit me up, and if you're a guy struggling, I want to hear from you.
Awesome. Thanks, brother. Yeah, we'll post everything up so the guys know where to go. Brother, I appreciate you. Appreciate your work and your sacrifice to this country and sharing and imparting some of your wisdom with us today. Thanks, man.
Thank you so much, Ryan.